So it seems like every flower farmer and every new flower farmer even wants to grow tulips. Well, while they are beautiful, what if I told you I spent $1,545 on tulip bulbs in 2024 for the 2025 spring. And in the spring of 2025, I sold every single sellable tulip and I didn't even break even. Because that's the truth. That's what happened in the spring of 2025. If you are a new flower farmer or have been flower farming for a while and you want to know if tulips are profitable or what the risk factors are for tulips, then stick around for this video because I'm going to tell you all the things that went wrong. I'm Ruth Ann from Abundant Blooms Flower Farm, and this is my 7th year of flower farming. I didn't grow tulips until about my 5th year of flower farming, which was nothing wrong with that. First year I grew tulips, things went pretty good, and the second year I grew tulips, which would be this past spring was the second year, things went really terribly. I had a lot of different issues. I had a lot of crop loss and different things, and so I told you I spent $1,500 on tulip bulbs, and I sold $1,193 worth of tulips this season, and I sold every single sellable stem. I sold almost 1,000 tulip stems, and so I lost a lot because I had 3,600 tulips. That's what that cost was for. That 1,545 is for 3,600 tulips. It was a journey. I'm going to dig into it, and I have some strong opinions about tulips, and this is why. And so I think it's just helpful to understand, like, from the numbers and what can happen. And I'm not saying that this will happen every year. This didn't happen to me my first spring of growing them, but it did the second year, and it was kind of a wake-up call. Like, wow, I didn't even cover the cost of my bulbs. That was really discouraging. Just, like, put me in this, like, how do I go forward from here? What's the tulip plan? Was it just a bad year, or, are these worth the risk? So let's get into the more nitty-gritty. It is freezing outside. It's supposed to be 2 degrees in the morning, and the temperatures have been dropping all day. So we're in the warmest spot beside my house, I guess. The warmest spot on the farm. Tulips right now are a very popular crop among flower farming, and there's good reason for that. We'll talk about that. They're beautiful. They're early spring flowers, so it gets you to market earlier. It gets your flowers producing earlier. For me, in West Michigan, zone 5B, 6A, it depends on who you ask, we cannot hit Mother's Day very easily without tulip. Even in my tunnel, I missed Mother's Day by a week last year. So the only crop that is really reliable is the tulips and sometimes daffodils, but usually daffodils are done before Mother's Day. So it's tricky, very, very tricky. Tulips have a good vase life. Tulips store well if you have a cooler. So the question isn't why people want to grow tulips, it's whether or not they're a smart investment. These are specialty cut varieties, which are more expensive than if you're just buying single tulips. So these are things like Columbus and double sugar, and so they're doubles, and parrots would run you in the same price range. Who should not grow tulips, in my opinion? I do not think you should grow tulips if you do not have customers. If you are in your first or second year of flower farming and you don't know who your customers are going to be in the spring, I would 100% not grow tulips. The other people that should be really, really cautious about growing tulips are if you do not have a cooler. So tulips will ripen really, really quickly in the field, and you have to harvest them at a very, very specific stage. And if you don't, they'll blow in the field and you won't be able to sell them. And so they store for several weeks if you pick them at the correct time, but you have to store them in a cooler. And they only have a very, very short harvestable window, like hours long sometimes. So if you don't have a cooler or a way to store them at 40 or better yet 34 degrees, I just would really, really be careful about growing tulips. Tulip bulbs are very expensive to invest in. I think they're very expensive to invest in, and I'm going into my 7th year. When capital is limited, I do not think that this is the place to put it. If you have high risk crops and you have limited capital, I just don't think that it's a very wise combination. The other thing is there is a lot of crop loss. So yeah, I spent $2,221 $1 on tulips this year. So they're 53 cents a bulb or 52 cents a bulb. But that's if I sell every single tulip bulb. So if I'm not selling every single tulip bulb, then that cost per bulb, or that, recovery cost, has to increase a lot. Like I said, tulips have a very, very specific harvest window, especially if you're selling them to florists, which I have a free download if you're interested in selling flowers to florists. It's called Free Tips for Selling Flowers to Florists. So check that out. So you have a very short harvestable window. So if you miss that window, you're going to have a whole bunch of blown out tulips that you're not going to be able to sell. So there's loss there, which every single flower farmer I know loses some degree of tulips to not being able to harvest them at the right time, because you're not going to be out in your field literally all day, in the spring. The other thing is, a lot of flower farmers had had a lot of issues with bulbs last year. This was not just me. This was like people all over the country. I had something called bud abandonment. So my tulips this spring came up really beautifully, mostly, and then they just never produced a bud, or they would like start to produce a bud and they would just not produce anymore. I had a really, really hot day, which can be typical here in Michigan in the spring. Will be nice and cool, and then it'll be 85 degrees for a day. And I had really beautiful Gadoshnik double tulips that got sunburned, and they just like shriveled up, and the bud was there, and they were beautiful and tall, and then they just weren't, and I wasn't able to sell them. I had a lot of short tulips. So just overall, my tulip crop was short and small. I had over a 50% crop loss. I had entire varieties that I lost to bud abandonment, like 600 bulbs. 600 bulbs. So that makes your tulip bulbs cost like over $1 a bulb, like just for the bulb. And then there's so many other implements that go into it, like labor and compost and bulb crates and cost to run your cooler, and all those other things that go into selling them. So I think some of this was potentially a bulb problem, that the bulbs were having issues and they didn't have a good bulb year. I don't know 100%. I just know that I sold every single stem that I could harvest this spring. I sold every single one, and I still did not make enough money to pay for the cost of my bulbs. And tulips are a lot of work. So that, was really discouraging for me. There's also some other risk factors. I haven't always dealt with this, but voles can eat all your tulip bulbs, completely wipe them out. There's also something called tulip fire, which can destroy an entire crop. I've never personally had that, but I know flower farmers that have lost like 17,000 tulip bulbs to that. Yeah, and you have to have cold storage. Otherwise, you can only store them for a very short period of time if you're not storing them with cold storage. So I've heard other flower farmers talk about tulips as a lost leader. So what that means is that, that you're not going to make money on this. You could potentially lose money on it, but the purpose of growing the tulips is to get to market sooner, get to your florist first, have something to sell for Mother's Day, so your customers think that you have flowers during the biggest flower holiday of the year. There are reasons that you would potentially take a loss to grow tulips. So I definitely acknowledge that. But just know going into it that you might not make money on these. So you have to be willing to put out the risk of putting out the high cost that it takes to grow tulip bulbs. And the reality is the tulip bulb price has really increased. There's been multiple reasons for that, but I know in the Netherlands, they've had several bad tulip growing years and just things outside of our control. Tariffs, all these different things that we can't control. In my third year of flower farming in 2022, I had about $1,000 left at the end of the season, of which I could invest into my farm. And I could have bought tulip bulbs. Instead, I planted 120 woody shrubs. It costs right about $1,000 to do that. And those woody shrubs are still paying me to this day. Whereas like the $1,000 I would have spent on the tulips, I probably would have barely recouped that, or not even recouped it, and have nothing to show for it now. So if it's a matter of choice of, should I invest into this or tulips, should I make a long-term investment into my farm, I would highly recommend that you plant woody shrubs. At least for me, that worked really well. So I have a video all about woody shrubs, and I would definitely 10 out of 10 do that again. I would definitely plant woody shrubs instead of buying tulips again. I just want to say that not every flower farmer agrees with this. Jenny Love did a podcast from her No-Till Flowers podcast, or maybe she was interviewed on a podcast about tulips and if tulips are profitable. And she said, yes, they are profitable. She thinks that they're profitable. She also is a farmer florist, so she is selling them at a very high dollar in her wedding, using them in her weddings. So, there definitely could be a reason why you grow tulips on your farm. I also have a friend, Brittany from Two Sisters Flower Farm. She has a YouTube channel. I'll link it in the description. And she grows a lot of tulips, and she sells them, and she lives just a couple miles from me. I actually emailed with her this spring, like, Brittany, what is going wrong with these tulips? How do you like them so much? What's the deal with them? And she gave me some good tips. She grows them hydroponically to have them for Valentine's Day here in Michigan, which is awesome. And she also told me that she thinks that growing them in crates gives you better stem length and just a better quality flower. So that's actually what I did this year. I already had these 4,200 tulips ordered, because for me in Michigan, I have to order the tulips before my season is even done. Maybe if you're in the South and your tulips are done in March, you don't maybe have such a tight timeline. But for me, like, if I wait till the end of my season, which is, mid to late May, often most of the good tulip varieties are sold out. So I have to make a decision about ordering for the following year before I can see my tulip season, the current, how it went currently. So what I did was I ordered these tulips, and I really thought, I'm going to cancel this order, or at least cancel a large portion of it. And I never did. And I just forgot. Like, the season gets going and I forgot. So what I ended up doing was I did sell some of my tulips to other flower farmers. I didn't sell that many of them, but maybe 600 or 700 of them. So I have a little more than 3,000 of them planted. And I did plant some of them in crates. And so I could potentially even bring them in my tunnel in the spring, if I needed to. So we'll see how that goes. The reality is that when you're selling them wholesale to florists like I do, you're not, they're still pretty expensive for a florist to buy. I charge between $1.60 and $1.80 or $1.85 a stem, for good tulips that are nice and tall and, not short ones like I was having last year. If you're experiencing loss like that, it still is really difficult to be profitable. You just have to run the numbers honestly and just decide if growing tulips is worth the risk for you, or if you're not necessarily growing them for profit because of other reasons outlined in this. But I really do believe that it's pretty important for new flower farmers, if they don't have the infrastructure and they don't have customers and they don't have a cooler, to really at least understand the risk. And even as a seasoned flower farmer, I did not grow tulips, like intentionally did not grow tulips until my 5th year of flower farming. And they just seemed like too high of a risk and cost too much money. And I was too busy investing into things like woodies and perennials to spend the capital on them at that point in my business. But they can get you to market early, but it can come with a cost. You can, some people say they can use daffodils instead of tulips. That is possible, but to me, mostly our daffodils are done before the tulips. So I think daffodils are also a tricky crop, just from a standpoint of you don't have other flowers to sell. And so if you only have one flower, it's just kind of hard to grow it. And they store, but they don't store as long as tulips. They do store a little while. So my experience has been, I prefer the later blooming daffodils because they will overlap with tulips typically. Basically, if you don't have a cooler, I really wouldn't recommend growing them. If you don't have customers, please don't grow them. If you're really expecting a high profit from them, I think you just got to really honestly look at your numbers. And maybe you are experiencing a really high profit, but that has absolutely not been my experience with them. So, but I'd love to hear your experience. Have tulips been profitable for you, or are they a struggle? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, I highly recommend that you check out my video about the 6 woody shrubs that I planted in 2022 instead of tulips. Let me know how you think of that. Until next time, I hope you're having a great holiday and kind of taking a winter break and hibernating and thinking through these numbers and profitability and determining where your farm will go in the future.